On today's show, the Houston Rockets playing a fantastic first half of ball against the Denver Nuggets, even weathering multiple runs in the third quarter. Unfortunately, the death blow to end that third quarter, creating a big deficit for the Rockets, was too much for them to overcome. Stephen Silas waving the white flag a little bit earlier than you would think in a normal game. Alperen Sengun going toe-to-toe with Nikola Jokic, at least in the first half of this game, and then receiving a huge endorsement from the two-time MVP after the game. Plus, Josh Christopher putting in the extra work after this game. We're going to talk about all that and more coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Well, the win streak was nice while it lasted. What's up? Welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays, host of the State of the Rockets podcast, as well as Rockets Watch. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets. This was a high-octane, competitive game between the Rockets and the Nuggets. I mean, just the fact that the Rockets were in this game right there at halftime with the Denver Nuggets, they were going back and forth. It was honestly kind of funny. We're going to talk about, obviously the marquee matchup here, the hype going into the game, Joker versus Baby Joker in, Jokic versus Sengun, how those two guys kind of matched up, where it all kind of went wrong in the third quarter for the Rockets. The Rockets kind of waving the white flag a little bit earlier than usual. Jokic with a huge endorsement for Alperen Sengun. Definitely want to talk about that. And then Josh Christopher putting in, continuing to put in the work post-game, which I thought was really impressive and something you don't see often out of players, especially on the road. So let's start with just the flow of this game early. And I thought it was really interesting, the dichotomy between how these two teams were attacking one another, because the Nuggets, as per usual, were running all their actions, all their offense through Jokic, but it felt like in the early going especially, Jokic was targeting Alperen Sengun, right? And Alpi picked up that early first foul, and it was questionable call at best. I think the refs were kind of maybe on one a little bit in this game. There were probably some star calls going Jokic's way. I've said it before. I hate blaming the refs for anything. There was a huge momentum moment, though, in this game that had to do with the referees and the challenge call. We'll talk about that in a moment. But early on, Jokic attacking Sengun, and then on the other end, the Rockets were attacking Jokic, but they weren't doing it directly through Sengun. What they were doing is they were involving Jokic and at times Jamal Murray, excessively in all the actions that they were running offensively. And the Nuggets were dropping Jokic, and the Rockets were slipping Alperen Sengun, which usually should work in the Nuggets' favor, but it wasn't, because Jokic just was not moving super well defensively. And so Alp was kind of like this connector piece offensively, where the ball handler would get the screen, Alp would slip really quick, and then whoever has the ball, Jalen or KPJ or EG, whoever, would feed Alp, and then Alp would get the ball on the short roll and be able to make something happen, either going directly at Jokic, going straight at him at the rim, or finishing over the top, or kicking it out for to an open shooter, or finding a cutter. Even there were a variety of ways that the Rockets' offense was really humming, with Alp being the glue, right, where so much of it was running through him in the first half as kind of that secondary guy, right? It didn't start with Alp. There were moments where he would get a post up, or he would have the ball on the perimeter and make a decision. But it was that pick and roll action and basically forcing Jokic to defend, right? And that's how the Rockets found so much offensive success in the first half. The ball was moving really, really well. They had 19 assists in the first half, and then they completely tapered off there in the second half and only had 6 or 7 assists to round out the rest of the game. KPJ talked about it postgame. The ball got sticky in the second half, right? They weren't doing what they were doing in the first half, and credit to the Nuggets defense. They locked in a little bit more defensively there in that second half and kind of prevented some of the bleeding that was happening there in the first half, where the Rockets were able to kind of get the ball to the middle of the floor and just make things happen. So in this game, though, the big storyline, right, kind of coming into this game was Alp versus Jokic. And Sengun held his own. Like, again, I talked about, Jokic going at Sengun, and Sengun picked up that early first foul, did a great job not picking up his second until much later on in the game. I was worried, that foul trouble would be an issue for Sengun, especially after that early first. It wound up being an issue later in the game, but he held his own, through that first half. And at one point when Sengun and Jokic both sat for their first rest of the game simultaneously, late in the first quarter, Alp had 10 points, 2 boards, and an assist, and Jokic had 10 points, 5 boards, and 4 assists. So, Jokic with clearly the slightly better stat line, as you would expect out of the 2-time MVP, but Alp and Jokic were going head-to-head in that first quarter, right, back and forth. Jokic would come down, get a bucket. Alp would go down, get a bucket, or, dish out a dime or swing the ball, and the Rockets would get a good look out of it. The ball movement was good, and they were running a lot of their stuff through Alp, which really helped over the course of the game, or over the course of that first half, I should say. Alp finished the game 18 points on 7 of 14 shooting, missed the couple threes that he took, had 4 or 5 at the charity stripe, 7 boards, 3 assists, did have 4 turnovers. There were some travel calls, offensive fouls, the Rockets as a team did a bad job getting whistled for travels all throughout this game. I felt like that point of emphasis really hurt the Rockets in this one. And then you look at the other side. Jokic wound up finishing the night, with an MVP stat line, 32 points, 12 boards, 8 assists, only 3 turnovers, 11 of 17 shooting, 90% at the free throw line, 9 of 10 free throw shooting. That's why he's a 2-time MVP, right? He got to a point where the Rockets could no longer contain him, where they were struggling with his size. He was, especially in that third quarter, he and Jamal Murray both had really strong third quarters. There's not much else you can do. The Rockets had a valiant effort through about almost 3 full quarters until the Nuggets basically broke things open there at the end of the third quarter, and the Rockets just could not, they didn't really give themselves a chance to recover from that one. I want to talk about that and kind of waving the white flag a little bit earlier in this one, as well as Nikola Jokic's endorsement of Alperen Sengun. Plus, we'll talk about some of the other performances from this game. KPJ had I think a quiet but solid night. And Jalen Green struggling from the floor, although he did have another high assist outing. Talk about KJ Martin's impact off the bench. All of that coming up in just 1 second. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Turo. Turo is the world's largest car-sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want, wherever you want it, from a community of local hosts. Browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the U.S., UK, Canada, and Australia. Book a spacious SUV or minivan for a family road trip. Get a classic or a luxury car for a special event, birthday, or holiday. You can find affordable economy cars if you're on a budget and you just need to get from point A to point B. You can even test drive that new electric car that you've had your eye on to see how it fits your everyday lifestyle. Many Turo hosts can even deliver the car right to your doorstep. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions do apply. Forget boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. 2 more things as they relate to Alperen Sengun here and the flow of this game and the outcome of this game, all of it, as well as want to touch base on some of the other guys, Jalen, KPJ, their nights in this game, KJ Martin, off the bench, Jabari, foul trouble for Jabari and Alp in this one. The kind of momentum-shifting play of this game, it felt like, was that bang-bang call where Alp had 2 fouls, Jokic had 2 fouls, and Jokic drove the ball in transition, and Alp tried to draw a charge. And it was whistled a charge on the floor. And then Mike Malone, credit to the Nuggets, challenged the call, and the call was overturned. Alp was, I think it was a 50-50 call. Could have gone either way. Alp was maybe sliding just a little bit, right? But I've seen moments like that with players still sliding a little bit and still whistled a charge. Maybe some star treatment there for Jokic. Who knows? But that call could have swung the outcome of this game because that call instead gave Alp his third, had to sit for the remaining couple minutes of the half. The Rockets offense was just not the same when Alp was off the court. They didn't have that connector piece to really kind of, attack the Nuggets defense. And then Jokic stayed out of foul trouble, right? Jokic would have had to potentially sit with 3 fouls, and that would have been a couple minutes without Jokic on the floor and would have teed him up perfectly for the Rockets to continue attacking him in the third quarter and try to force him to pick up his 4th foul. So it was unfortunate that it went, the Nuggets' way. That was a really big momentum play for the Nuggets, right? To have that call go in their favor. Yeah, it was tough. I do respect LP, though, for trying to draw that charge, right? When I asked LP about it post-game, he knew immediately. He was like, before I could even mention it, he was like, yeah, we both had 2. Like, he knew in that moment, he was like, if I draw this charge, it's 3 on Jokic, and he's going to have to go sit. So it was a heady play, or a heady heads-up play, whatever, by LP to try and make that happen. Didn't work out, but I like the attempt. And then the other thing, first off, also, I don't think I didn't mention in segment 1, Locked on Rockets player of the game, Alperen Sengun. It's a little bit weirder when I'm on the road and I have a double monitor set up at home, and it's like notes here, production stuff here, whatever, and like I only get the one monitor when I'm on the road, so it throws me off a little bit. But yeah, LP, just clear Locked on Rockets player of the game. In fact, when I was doing the poll, I had a couple people comment on the fact that normally, right, there's 4 options on the poll on Twitter and on the YouTube side. There are only 3 options after this game. I just put LP, KPJ, and then I put the other reply, so only 3 options. I could have probably included KJ Martin, but I also had such spotty cell reception at the arena that I was like, I just need to get this tweet out before I lose service again. Yeah, Locked on Rockets player of the game. He was the driving force of the Rockets offense in this game. I do think KPJ had a good but quiet night. We'll talk about that in a second. But for LP, after the game, Jokic spoke about the fact that he was impressed with Alp's play, and then he said this might be a little weird, but I think the Rockets should, I think they should play through him more, right? That things look good when they go through him, and it was just kind of an interesting kind of mention using Sengun kind of as a fulcrum for the offense, which is funny because that's one of the words that we use talking about Sengun, right? Using him as a fulcrum, within the offense, kind of trying to balance things out a little bit, running more action through him. Getting that endorsement from a 2-time MVP in Jokic, somebody that Sengun models his game after, somebody who he has said is his idol when it comes to basketball, that is huge. Like, that is a huge compliment for Alperen Sengun, and maybe even a little bit of an indictment on how the Rockets have been utilizing Sengun to this point, right? If you've got a 2-time MVP who plays a style very, similar to LP, then yeah, like him saying, hey, they should be using him more. Hopefully the Rockets do start using him more, right? Like, there's a level of, I think, buy-in that needs to happen from everybody else on the roster, right? And we're starting to see it. I think players are starting to understand how to be comfortable with LP on the floor, how to play off of him better, all of that. But it's taken time, right? It's I don't want to say it's unnatural. It's just different stylistically to a lot of how these guys have played for probably the majority of their careers, right? Most of these guys have probably never played with a legitimate post presence like LP, somebody that you have to kind of cater the offense to a little bit more. But when you do, good things happen. And so I think that's just it's another big development for LP. It's a step in the right direction. It's signs pointing towards, hey, the Rockets have this really talented guy, and they should utilize him a little bit more because things do look really, really good when they go through him the way that they have, situationally. Certain games when they go through LP super heavy, looks fantastic. And then there's other games where they get away from using LP at all, and it looks kind of bad. So use LP more. Jokic thinks so, and I think a lot of Rockets fans would agree with Jokic, even though he just handed the Rockets an L. So do want to talk about Jalen Green, KPJ, their performances in this game, as well as Josh Christopher hanging out after the game, getting shots up, putting work in after a loss on the road, which is kind of uncommon. Thankfully, there were no ladders in sight when Josh Christopher was working out in the gym after the game. We're going to talk about that in just one moment, but first, today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best, most qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's so simple to create a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs, and then once you have the job post made, you just add the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you are hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it incredibly easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so that you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedinjobs.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets Daily Podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, do I just, elsewhere that third quarter, right? I mean, talked about or asked KPJ about this at the end of the game, after the game, just what makes it so hard to defend Jamal Murray, because Murray really took off there in the third quarter. That's where the Nuggets, sealed the game basically. And seeing, basically Murray's a shooter, right? I mean, that's his bread and butter, but he also had the interior game going, right? That's what KPJ said. He was driving, he had the floater kind of going, and when he's got both sides of the game going, it makes it really hard to contain him. And the Rockets also had some defensive miscommunications in that third quarter, right, where they were switching certain actions, and there were multiple times where like two guys would were supposed to switch and one guy didn't know to switch, and then Murray got free and would get wide open three-pointer. He had one where he was being chased around by Jabari, and then Jabari got completely faked out of his socks. I mean, just like and Murray step back three-pointer with all the space in the world. Murray just went off that quarter. It was really tough. The Rockets had a really hard time trying to contain him. And then on the other end, it really felt like the Nuggets dialed up their defense in the second half. KPJ, Jalen Green. KPJ, quiet night. A good game, but a quiet night. 12 points, 4 boards, 6 assists, 1 steal, 1 block. Only 1 turnover, but only 4 of 9 shooting. Just really kind of in a reserve kind of role. And I think that it's tough to balance, because I think this is the type of game where like Jalen was really struggling with the ball pressure in this game, especially Bruce Brown, KCP, really great perimeter defenders, making life difficult for Jalen. He had 5 turnovers. He was struggling, I think, against the ball pressure. Only 5 of 15 shooting, 1 of 7 from deep. This type of game where Jalen is kind of struggling that way might be the type of game where it's like, okay, KPJ, like, maybe this could be the kind of game where you say, okay, like I'm getting everybody involved, I'm setting the table. Okay, now Jalen doesn't have it. We're struggling offensively. There were some moments where KPJ had really good, like I thought he had really great timing on some of his threes to kind of like answer some of the runs that the Nuggets went on. And it's weird because it's such a fine line between KPJ doing too much and doing not enough. I don't want to say he didn't do enough this game. That's unfair, because he had a really good game. It was just a quiet game. This could have been the one where when you see Jalen struggling, right? If KPJ had been able to step up a little bit more, take control of the rock a little bit more, have one of his bigger kind of KPJ type games, then things may have looked a little bit different. But it's unfair to place that expectation on him while also simultaneously in other games I've critiqued him and said he's doing too much, right? It's a very fine line to walk if you're KPJ. Like I understand it, right? That's the job of a point guard. It's tough to know when you should try and get yours versus when you should try and get other guys involved. It is what it is. But it was a good game from KPJ. I really liked the fact that he took care of the basketball. He got other guys involved. Less aggression out of him offensively than we're used to seeing, I think. Elsewhere for the Rockets, KJ Martin, 15 points, 6 boards off the bench, 5 of 9 shooting. Production is back after that little one-game dip he had against OKC. He had the huge game against the Hawks, bad game against OKC, and then another really strong night off the bench here in this one. His father, Kenyon Martin Sr., was in attendance in the crowd, and it was kind of funny. I was expecting like cheers when KJ Martin was like, when he first checked into the game. Crowd like didn't react whatsoever. Like I don't know if they just didn't know that there's like, I don't know if they didn't recognize the relationship or what, but I was expecting like some cheers from the crowd. It was like nothing happened. All in all, I think there's a lot of good that can be taken away from this game from the first half and even throughout the majority of that third quarter, because the Rockets they held their own against a very good Denver Nuggets team, and it'll be interesting to see what adjustments they make coming back into their next matchup with this Nuggets team on Wednesday night. I do want to say Jabari Smith Jr. had just 4 shot attempts in this game, all of them from 3. He was 3 of 4 from 3. Had few rebounds. He was out of the flow of the game because of his foul trouble, right? He picked up the 2 fouls really, really early on. Picked up a third foul later on, a minute later. He had 2 fouls, 6 minutes in the game, and then 1 minute later, Silas was trusting him to stay in the game, to not pick up his next foul, and Tari Eason was even walking up to the scorer's table to check in, or he was already at the scorer's table waiting to check in, and Jabari picked up his third foul. And that just completely ruined the flow of the game. It probably messed up substitution patterns, all of that. And Silas even trusted Jabari to play a couple minutes there back in the second quarter because he needed size on the floor, right? He was running that big lineup of Tari, Jabari, and Sengun for a few minutes there in the second quarter because the Rockets were just getting completely crushed on the glass. And then he wound up closing the quarter with EG back in the lineup and KJ closing out the half. But it was that definitely played its part. The foul trouble for Jabari, the later on the foul trouble for Sengun, all of it. They couldn't find the rhythm that they had in that first half because of the way that the Nuggets dialed things up defensively in the second half, all of it. I think that, and after the game, Sengun was very well aware. I'm bouncing around a little bit here in the third segment, but Sengun was super aware of the call to the momentum shifting call. And I think that was cool. He was just aware, the 2 fouls on both sides, that kind of thing. But last thing that I want to talk about here is, I was hanging out after the game. I usually walk back out to the court after the game and just kind of, check things out for a minute. And I walked back out, and Josh Christopher was out there just getting shots up. All right, we had wrapped up post game, everything. I was leaving locker room, and Josh is back out there, and he's just getting shots up. Right, guys are rebounding for him, and I was like, oh, okay, he's just getting some post game shots up, and I stayed. I wanted to see how long he was going to stay out there. Josh stayed out there for 30 minutes after a post-game loss on the road, getting shots up. And he shot from everywhere on the floor. He was doing set shots, he was doing step backs, he was driving, getting to his mid-range, all of it. He shot it from everywhere on the floor over the course of about 30 minutes, and I stayed and watched every single shot. And when I tell you, Josh has had some struggles this season, and I think part of that also probably stems from inconsistent minutes. It's hard for anybody to find consistency if you're getting, 2 minutes one game, then DNP, then 10 minutes, then DNP, then 3 minutes. It's really hard to find a rhythm. And I do think a silver lining possibly here is if Jalen Green's playmaking continues to trend upwards the way that it has, I could very seriously see a timeline, a possibility where Josh Christopher makes more sense ahead of Jae'Sean Nix in the rotation because you can rely on Jalen Green as more of the table setter, the playmaker on the floor if you're running action through him, because I think that Josh gives you a better, much more needed added dimension offensively as long as he's playing within the flow of the offense. I think that's been one of my biggest gripes with Josh is at times he gets a little tunnel vision, right? We saw it a little bit in Summer League. We've seen it a little bit in the early going of this season, but when he's playing free and within the flow of the offense, he can be really, really effective. And I think that's one of the drawbacks to Jae'Sean Nix is offensively, he's very limited. He can shoot the spot up 3, and those numbers have been good this season, but there's too many times where you see Jae'Sean drive and nothing happens. Or he'll drive and the defense just knows that it might be a tough shot right at the rim, whatever. He can't reliably create his own offense, right? He can pass the ball to others, and he's a good playmaker, but even that is, hit or miss some of the time. So if the Rockets can rely on Jalen Green as a playmaker moving forward, and if he can continue this trend of, high assist games, good facilitating, all that. He had the 5 turnovers in this one, but again, ball pressure, whatever. If he can continue growing in that regard, then I would love to see a chance for Josh Christopher to get those Jae'Sean Nix minutes instead and have him, he's guarding the opposing ones or whatever. He's in the point guard slot essentially, but Jalen is the lead ball handler, the main facilitator on the floor. That could be an interesting dynamic for Stephen Silas to explore. Because, again, I still have high hopes for Josh as far as just his ability to defend, his ability to create his own offense, all of those things. And so hopefully that's something that we see, kind of play out in this not-so-distant future. Because Jae'Sean Nix has been, I talked about it before, his new nickname, Bitcoin, on this podcast. He's been very up and down throughout the season. There's moments that look really good, and there's moments that don't look so hot, right? Some mistakes that are total head scratchers. So it could be getting to about that time where if Jae'Sean Nix can't find that consistency to maybe swap things around a little bit and give Josh a shot back in the rotation, especially again if Jalen can continue this trend. But I've said it before. I hung out. I watched all 30 minutes of him getting those shots up at the end of the game. His work ethic is going to take him a long way in this league, and hopefully that's with the Houston Rockets. But if he continues to, not get playing time and not have a spot in the rotation, then further down the line, right, it would be so disappointing to see Josh Christopher shine on another team if he doesn't get a legitimate shot here in Houston, especially after earning his way into the rotation last season and now kind of being buried at the end of the bench. It's just, it's a tough shake for Josh, but he hasn't let that faze him. He still puts in all the work, and it's really, really impressive to see, how much he does work behind the scenes to, make things happen. So with that, final thoughts from this one in Denver. We will have you covered for the next game, of course, here in Denver. I'll be here for the next 3 days. It's already snowing here. I've never seen snow before, and it is unreasonably cold, hence the beanie. That's why we got Beanie Jackson on today's podcast. But with that, that's going to do it for today's show. As always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so, consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcast. That's Apple, Spotify, Google, Odyssey app, free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Go check us out on YouTube. You can help out the show tremendously by commenting anything below. Any comments help out the show, but tell me what your favorite part was from this game between Alperen Sengun and Nikola Jokic matching up with one another. What was your favorite moment in this game? Let me know. I do read each and every one of those every single day. But as always, thank you so much for checking out the show. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. We look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.